The 3D platformer is a genre that I grew up with. It means a lot to me as it was my introduction to the world of video games. The very first game I remember playing is Sonic Adventure 2 on a Dreamcast my father bought during the incredible deep sales they went on after they were discontinued in the early 2000s. The PS2 and its backwards compatibility allowed me to experience some of the premium platformers of the PS1 generation, Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, Croc and others, years after they were released, but all of these games have lived long in the memory. Every console since, be it a GameCube, Wii or PS4, I find myself playing the 3D platformer of the day. Not every one is a masterpiece, sure, but the genre means something to me through the good and the bad. This attachment is what made the 2010s a bittersweet decade to be a gaming fan, as the 3D platform was very much out of fashion. As you can see from this chart from GameRanks, the number of 3D platformers took a big dip in the 2010s, as the gaming population moved away from mascot platformers to a number of different genres, such as the FPS or open world RPGs. There are many theories on why the drop-off occurred, such as oversaturation of shoddily made titles, the industry-wide shift to bigger worlds and deeper stories, and the absorption of the many of the genre's key mechanics into bigger, different genres. No matter the truth of the situation, the fact is, there were fewer new platformers to enjoy. From the peak of 14 titles in 2002 to just one new title in 2012, this drop-off is as significant as it is essential, but you've probably noticed that this chart only goes up to 2017. In the years following, and including this year, something interesting happened. There's been an upturn. Those who grew up with the genre were now nostalgic for the titles of their childhood, and many of those who played these games had become developers themselves, wanting to make their own homages to the titles that got them interested in gaming to begin with. The indie boom and the emergence of Kickstarter-funded projects allowed titles such as Yooka-Laylee and A Hat in Time to come into existence, homages to Banjo-Kazooie and Super Mario 64 respectively. From here, using collated reviews from Video Chums, ascertained that 2019 provided 5 new 3D platformers, 2020 provided 13, and 2021 provided 14. Sure, remakes of some old classics are included, but this doesn't change the fact that the games were being produced again and they were selling. The games were back. Well, sort of. The games weren't the big AAA system sellers they once were, but the important fact is, 3D platformers were back, and in June of 2020, one such game was announced as part of IGN's Summer of Gaming, a little indie title from developer Fabraz known as Demon Turf. As a developer, Fabraz's previous title Slime Sun was an extremely well regarded take on a 2D Game Boy inspired platformer, and in an interview with IGN, the developers felt that they had achieved all they could with that perspective, inspiring them to take the bold leap into 3D, first by experimenting with 2.5D platformers, and then transitioning into full 3D with Demon Turf. As you can see from the trailer footage on screen, the 3D is brought forth with a sprinkling of a 2D twist, that twist being the distinctive art style that immediately made an impact, and placed itself on my list of games to watch. The trailer showed plenty of gameplay, and the platform mechanics on show resembled a certain Italian, red-liking, dungarees wearing plumber, which pretty much sealed that I would play this when it released. Then, I forgot it existed, and only picked it up a few weeks ago on the PS5. That's the problem with me in games, there are so many out there I want to play, that I get excited about, and then it takes a while to come out and I forget that I was interested to begin with. Regardless, I have now played this game, so I'm Wagner, and this is Demon Turf. Demon Turf released across PlayStation, PC, Xbox and the Nintendo Switch on the 4th of November 2021 and received moderate praise from the gaming review outlets. Before buying most games, I read reviews. Most people do. People say that if you are yourself reviewing a game, you shouldn't read other people's opinions, as it may influence your opinion on the game. And I understand that view, but I don't subscribe to it myself. I find it interesting to hear what other people thought of the game so I can then compare my experience with theirs. This isn't to call them wrong or to affirm my own opinion as right, it is simply an attempt to engage with the gaming community and enjoy gaming in my own unique way. So because of this, I'm going to go over the critical reception of the game from a few leading outlets and see what they made of it, before then engaging and critique myself. Let's go. First of all, Nintendo Life awarded the game 8 out of 10, complimenting the excellent platforming controls, the art direction and the number of additional quests included, but noted that the combat sections were poor. Destructoid awarded the game 5.5 out of 10, calling it mediocre, and saying that Demon Turf has the double whammy of not being that unique nor well executed. They did cite the art style as pretty striking, but levied criticism at the checkpoint mechanics, the difficulty curve and the overall predictability of the experience. Nintendo Insider awarded the game 6 out of 10, with the reviewer remarking that it didn't tantalise their platforming taste buds as they had hoped, but could see it gathering a well-deserved following, highlighting the speedrunning potential the moveset gives the player. And finally, Pure Xbox, whilst awarding a 7 out of 10 score and complimenting the content, art style and platforming, also bemoaned the combat as well as the inconsistent performance and the spikes in challenge. So, a mixed reception leaning to the more positive side of the scale. I'm not going to go over every single review because that would be stupid, you could just look it up yourself. But clearly, critics could see areas that Demon Turf shined but tended to find almost as much to criticise as to praise. The average view score across all platforms on review aggregation sites and seer of all things, Metacritic, is 73.5. The combined user score is 67. The user score did surprise me, not because of the lowish number, but because this was only formed by 6 user reviews. I had thought this game would be a little more popular than this, and it showed me that I probably spend too much time watching game trailers, reading reviews and researching games on Steam. But considering that the all-time peak of players on Steam is only 91, with the last 30 days average being only 7, the game isn't quite the indie juggernaut I had expected it to be. Of course, the caveat here is the stat doesn't include console players or the Epic Games Store, and although I'm sure it sold fairly well on Switch, I think it's fair to say that the game didn't hit home like I had expected it to pre-release. So now that's out of the way, let's find out why and just play the damn game. Before we go on, here is a spoiler warning. Demon Turf is not a story-heavy game, but in this analysis review video essay, I am going to show gameplay from each and every level, as I try and convey my thoughts on this platformer. I also want to point out that I didn't 100% this game. I only ever 100% a game if it connects with me on the deepest level, and I can count the ones that have on one hand. It doesn't mean a game sucks if you don't finish everything it has. It doesn't mean your opinion isn't valid either. Once again, it's just how I play games. So, if you don't want to see the spoilers, please click off the video now and just go and play the game. Go on, shoot. It's probably worth it. You gone? I'm going to start now. Okay? Bonza. Being a 3D platformer, Demon Turf isn't exactly a novella in game form, but a story is present. Our protagonist Beebs is a young, precocious demon with a big dream. She wishes to take over the demon world by defeating the teasing, demeaning Demon King, who begins the game by invading Beebs' dream and antagonising her into attacking him. Beebs then decides to finally put her long thought out plan into action, and alongside her Kappa friend Midgie, a constant companion whose upbeat and forward looking personality pushes Beebs forward throughout the story. However, Beebs can't just storm the castle and take the king out straight away. No. Instead, to unlock the gate portal to the castle, she must collect 50 batteries across the 4 separate biomes in order for the Demon King to take her seriously. Each biome is ruled by one of the Demon King's commanders, and Beebs must defeat all 4 of them as well. Beebs' friend and lackey of the Demon King, Lucy, initially seems to support her friend, but as the story progresses, her loyalty to Beebs wanes as it appears she might actually achieve her outlandish goals. As I said, the story isn't deep, but the characterisation across the game is very good, with the residents all treating Beebs as a child and belittling her semi-constantly. She ignores and endeavours on her and defeats the guardian of each world, and then engages in a fight with the Demon King, to which he reigns victorious. Honestly, I don't have much to say, as there really isn't much to comment on. The story is sufficient as an excuse to engage with the game's mechanics and collect the batteries needed to progress the game forwards, but it's not exactly competing with the best story-heavy platformers, such as the Psychonauts games. It's good, but not worth writing home about. Within the first 10 seconds after clicking on the New Game button in the opening menus, you're straight into a tutorial level, and considering that is all it is a pretty impressive tutorial all things considered. You are provided a neat little sandbox to acquaint yourself with the control scheme, and it introduces you to the basic level format. Instead of a fully handheld experience, the game places signs with the most basic controls along the intended path, and gives the player the option whether or not to read them, or to just experiment their way along the level. Whilst I don't feel pumping signs on the ground is the most natural way of teaching the player what to do in a game, I do feel that they are unobtrusive enough to actually not cause any trouble. On the contrary, I actually think the signs work really well, all things considered. So yeah, unnatural but effective. Well, the main effect here is the unobtrusive tutorial system encourages the player to experiment with the controls in the safe confines of the tutorial, before then being thrown into the full game. If it had a demo, this would be the perfect introduction. The level itself is as simple as you'd expect from a tutorial, and it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There is a section where you use your combat mechanics to push blocks, and the camera constantly fought with me here, as well as in the combat tutorial. I also found it odd that combat wasn't really explained in much depth. It took me a few levels to actually work out that enemies can't really be hurt by you, and you're instead just pushing them round. You have to puzzle them into some spikes off the combat arena entirely to kill them. I'll get onto the combat in more depth later, but even playing the short tutorial fight didn't really get me excited. But, yes, on the whole the tutorial level did its job, and whilst the combat area was tedious, the platform mechanics seemed to fit like a glove. Sure, I myself made some stupid jumping mistakes, but I enjoyed getting up to speed with Beebs' athletic moveset in this little microcosm of the game. And speaking of the moveset, it is time for our first stop on this journey. So, before going on to talk about World 1 proper, I think it's best to tackle the platform mechanics and controls in detail before then moving on to critique the rest of the game. By splitting this analysis up into separate sections, I hope to make it digestible and easy to understand. This is likely to fail, but this is the intent nevertheless. So, Beebs, as expected from a character in a run and jump game, dines out on her ability to run and jump. Within the realm of 3D platformers, there is a variation of focus from game to game. Ratchet & Clank, for example, is a combat-heavy platformer, whereas Mario is very moveset focused. Demon Turf is very much closer to Mario than it is other platforming colleagues. In fact, it might even be the closest to a Mario game in terms of the fluidity of movement and the way that the game encourages you to move. Maybe equalled by Hat in Time, but in terms of Demon Turf's moveset, it is fairly extensive. It is as follows: a jump, a double jump, a triple jump, a spin, a somersault, a jump into a spin, a double jump into a spin, a jump into a spin into a super jump, and then two types of punch, a charged blow and a flurry of jabs. There are also various boss gadgets such as a swing shot and a speedy snake wheel, and there are also swimming mechanics, such as, swimming. One of the big mechanics in the game that Demon Turf brings with it is the checkpoint system. Instead of the designers placing checkpoints throughout each and every level, the game allows you to place a checkpoint where you think is best, which sounds good. But in practice I hate it. Early on this doesn't really matter because the levels are very short, but once the difficulty is cranked up, it really does become a problem. The fundamental flaw with this idea is you do not know how long a level is going to be when you're starting it. You could find 3 challenging platform sections back to back, and you are limited to only 3 checkpoints per level. So you are then forced to slog through a level without knowing how many times you're going to have to repeat the same section over and over again. I understand that those who enjoy challenging titles might take this particular point as a point to be praised, but instead, I simply question whether the mechanic was needed to begin with. The designers know their levels and can ascertain where the difficulty lies, by leaving it up to the player. If the levels were simply 5 minutes apiece, this would be a non-issue, but with many levels stretching the 20-minute mark and sometimes exceeding even that, this instead leads to the game feeling like a slog. Many times I felt like quitting because of these levels, and sure, some of the complaints fall on my lack of ability, but somebody who has played countless 3D platformers in his time, I do question whether this frustration is entirely down to my own motor skills, or that maybe this mechanic was ill thought out and didn't work quite as well as it did on paper. But moving back to the moveset, on the whole, it's pretty great. Thebes has near instant movement that responds to the slightest of your inputs in a smooth, crisp and engaging way. Within seconds of starting the game up, I felt able to spring my way along the path like a Mario, and it was almost a nostalgic feeling, really. In terms of character feel, they have really gotten as close to Mario, circa 64 Mario really, as they possibly could without being the plumber. And yes, whilst the moves alone seem bland and mundane, it's through the combination of moves where the game feels at its absolute best. Springing from jump into a spin into a super jump feels incredibly satisfying, and this feels even better when you combine it with a small bounce, so you can do it all over again. This creates a conga line of satisfying gameplay that will continue as long as you feel capable of performing them. Game feel and the basic platforming gameplay is where Demon Turf truly shines the brightest. So, here we go. World 1. Time for the level by level breakdown I promised, and this is where I want to explain my intentions with this. By going through each level, however briefly, I want to try and reflect my experience with the game, and how each level made me feel as I was playing through it. So, let's get it done. Baby Canyon. A very nice introduction to this world and plays like an extension of the original tutorial level. The level is a simple climb to a high peak, but it climbs gradually enough to never be particularly challenging but always rewarding. The canyon aesthetic helps here, as your main goal is always in view, and this is something later goals do stumble with. Placing well thought out checkpoints is easy to do here, and the placement of the optional sweet collectibles are about as well thought out as they could be in such a basic beginner level. It is a little short, but one that was fun not just to play but to replay. It's a great start. Tight Ravine. This level is fine. Thematically it is pretty nice. A big sand tornado engulfing a mountain mine. It's a nice visual effect, but it does hurt the eyes a bit. The platforming is a little more difficult here, but everything is manageable and seems mostly fair. There's no leaps of faith. The additional collectibles require a little more exploration, and yeah, I like this one too. It's a pain to replay due to the high level of verticality, but it is fun nevertheless. Grander Canyon. As the name suggests, this feels like an extension to Baby Canyon, and once again the obstacle course style layout brings me joy. The spinning gears don't really fit thematically, and that does worry me a little, as the world building is one of the greatest joys I have had with this game to this point, but I do have a severe complaint this time. The combat arena. Sure, it's over quick, but it is so damn bland. It's one button combat and it's the same every time. It's so dull that all you need to do is avoid the enemy and hit them into spikes. Every single time. Platforming good, combat bad, nice level. Arena City. Fun level that involved working your way through various barns to reach the top. Once again, platforming fun and not overly challenging, the combat inside the barns was tedious. Feels like this is becoming a theme. Cave huts. The worst this world has to offer. The first time I had doubts that this game would be a fun, comfortable ride to the finish. Level begins with a leap of faith that I made after countless attempts. I found out later that there is a button to activate your bridge somewhere, but I couldn't find it, even after going back. The second area is much the same, with an invisible floor mechanic that was a huge pain, and all the puzzles in this level were obtuse and unfun. I actively wanted to stop playing the game at this point, and I was pretty close to doing so. The idea of pig experiments is a fine idea in principle, but God was it executed poorly. Dreadful level. Berg Vault. An attempt to break into the pigmen's fortress. It's a wonderful set piece, but the level leaves much to be desired. Set checkpoints would work well with this level thanks to the extreme verticality. Working your way up the tower is challenging, but I wouldn't say it was particularly enjoyable. Waiting around for the right platform to turn up is never fun, no matter the game. Once you do make your way inside the tower, you have to glide down through a laser defense system, like Beeb's Bond. However, lack of movement when gliding down means you need to know where the holes are before you jump, which is impossible. In a game where one hit kills you, leaps of faith are a huge black mark. It's an average level at best, but its large size makes it tedious. Flower Field. Thematically fitting and flowery fun, which is bloody difficult to say. Flower Field adds bouncy flowers to the equation. This level has a good progression of difficulty, using a Mario-style rising difficulty with every new mechanic that's brought in this case for bouncy flowers. The bouncy flowers are a better gimmick than the laser grids and tedious pig experiments. A better way to end the level. After completing all the levels in this world, one thing I do like is that not just the hub world, but each individual level themselves contributes to the world building through the native inhabitants being spread around them. Minor pigs, normal citizens and invaders from a different realm all appear and add just a tiny little bit of umami to the already savoury demon turf broth. After World 1 there are a couple of things that do stick out. One, the tedium in 2 of the levels lead me to think the idea of attempting to 100% this game is a bad one. I don't 100% many games to begin with, and if the first world has levels that actively irritate me, chances are finishing the game will be a slog, let alone completing it. 2. The platforming controls in this game are really strong, but the level design seems to be struggling to make the most of them. I'm far from a most skilled gamer, but I am resilient. I can keep picking myself up and fighting back if I feel the experience is a rewarding one. Most of the time here though, it isn't. The game seems to be more fun when the difficulty is lower, and the game can just focus on the running and the jumping. I hope that as the game progresses they don't double down on difficulty and sap away the fun parts the game does have, but I suppose we're going to have to wait and see about that one. Boss level. Okay, here's another bit of negativity. Boss levels sort of suck throughout the game. Instead of acting as a test of everything you've learnt playing the game to this point, they take the odd game design choice to choose this exact moment to thrust a new gadget on you. Adding a new mechanic to the game at this point in each world is ill-advised. It means the boss ends up being more of a tutorial for the new mechanic instead of an interesting challenge. The boss being a tutorial isn't fundamentally bad, but the way in which the first boss goes about this really isn't fun at all. My main problem is that the camera bugged out quite a lot during the fight, and even more so during the final part of the fight, where you try and put your final blow on the boss Fredo. Oh yeah, the boss's name is Fredo. It takes a reasonably nice cinematic moment and smears it with disappointment. It's not the dying I dislike, it's that the puzzle solving, and the combat, dilutes the excellent platforming. Focusing on what this game does poorly just makes you wish you were actually platforming as Beebs instead of slogging through a 10-minute boss encounter with some disgusting overzealous pig. I'm not saying combat doesn't work in platformers. I'm just saying that it doesn't work in this one. Well, in this boss at the very least. And here is where I was going to wrap up the World 1 talk, but then it happened. The game dropped the bomb. After beating the boss, you get the chance to challenge each level again in a sort of flip-side version of itself. The level is morphed from its original form to a slightly different version of itself. It is still clearly based off the same level, but it does add a little pizzazz to things. It resembles the system found in the Yooka-Laylee sequel, albeit far inferior to what was found in that game. I was going to go through each flip-side level separately, but they don't change enough to justify it. So instead I've bullet pointed a few interesting things that came up. Number 1. Seeing the changes Beebs has made in each area since coming to power is cool. It's good world building. Number 2. On the whole, the levels that were good before the flip side were still good after the flip. 3. The implementation of the swing shot mechanic into these levels actively made them more irritating through awkward controls, and the fact that it doesn't work if you do a double jump. I mean, it increases the number of death pits and cheap deaths, and it really made the game tedious to play for it. 4. 50 sweets to collect in each flipside world seems excessive. Many are obvious, but I struggle to see the reason behind them. There is a lack of incentive. Incentive is less important when there are only three sweets in each level. In the flipside levels, when there's 50, it's too much to ask. 5. The experiments level was manageable this time. It was better, I preferred this version. But it was still pretty dull by the end. And my final bullet point, number 6, sandstorm and other weather mechanics impede vision in a way that sort of hurts the eyes, adds very little, and I don't know, it makes the game's difficulty feel artificial in a way. They're not making the platforming difficult, they're just adding an external factor that adds very little to the game itself. So that is World 1 finally done. Now, we can take a little break from the levels by discussing something very near and dear to my heart. Fonts. I'm really anal about fonts. If a game has an ugly, unappealing font, that tends to be what sticks with me. It can make a good game feel really cheaply made, and actually genuinely upset me. I know this sounds crazy, but for example, The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 1 is a pretty good game, one I enjoyed on the whole. But I do find it impossible to get the ugly font they used for most of the game out of my head. Luckily, Demon Turf doesn't have that problem, as not just for fonts, but the UI is very, very good on the whole. It's not quite industry leading, but damn, those are some nice fonts. And before we make a start on World 2, I'd like to discuss this game's killer feature, the visuals. The visuals in stills look incredible. The 2D characters jumping and running across the 3D backgrounds regularly look very nice. But the big shame here is that the level backgrounds really do vary in quality. I'm going to try and say this, the Armageddon world looks extremely nice and tropical, and is regularly very pleasing to look at. The other worlds, not so much. The problem is, and with the desert world especially, World 1, environmental effects obscure the stage so much that it becomes almost impossible to see where to go and what to, well, do. The filters sort of suck the joy out of the environments. Sandstorm is a nice idea, but the never-ending beige sand makes visibility a problem. And not in the way intended. It washes the screen out and makes the game look incredibly uninviting to play. This happens across all worlds regardless of the effect. There's a green filter across New Neo City, or a purple smog in the second world. The game has such a unique art style, but it often trips itself up by simply adding too much to the pie. There's not really much more to add that I haven't already said. Character designs are nice, and the UI is great. I don't know what UA is. The UI is great, and despite the environmental hazards, the game does have a really nice polish all round. It just screams indie game, and that's not an insult. An indie game can look excellent, and this is a very good looking game for a game obviously created on a budget, and it is the one thing that kept me going as long as I did. As for the music and sound, I can be even briefer. I know precious little about music. I theorise that good video game music is quickly forgotten, with only the great and the terrible being remembered. I remember Yoshi's New Island's music because it was truly terrible. I remember the main theme, the Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz HD, because it was excellent. I find it very difficult to comment on any of the music in Demon Turf, because it is all within the range of okay to good. Nothing to live long in the memory. The game does have voice acting sporadically, but it's not really worth talking about. It's equal to what you'd get in the early 2000s, good but forgettable. Other than that, I have very precious very precious little to offer, and it was easy to listen to and unfortunately also easy to forget. So let's get back on course and talk about World 2. World 2 Armageddon. A tropical paradise world with striking visuals and the threat of forced swimming sections. Baby Ocean. Solid early platforming with some irritating swing shot stuff to connect the passages together. I didn't mention the swimming controls earlier because they were sort of a non-issue. They are functional, but they don't particularly stand out. Visibility isn't amazing in the water. I don't enjoy the swing shot as a mechanic because it feels clunky to use, but all things considered, despite the reliance on the swing shot in this level, it's not terrible. Average at best. Tidal Climb. This wasn't terrible either. You have to escape what seems like a giant sink, but you basically climb up, pull a lever, let some water out, fill the sink with water, and repeat until you reach the top. Whilst I've made this seem like a chore, the level itself was pretty nice on reflection. I found some jumps a little tight, but considering my lacking skill, this very well could be down to me. It could even have been good if not for the irritating combat arenas. See? I knew it would come back again. Volcanic Trip. Poison. Fire. Water. Disappearing when you jump platforms. This level throws quite a lot at you, but it all fits. Combat still sucks, but jumping through a volcano is pretty enjoyable. The mix between water and fire doesn't seem to mesh, with the world, but it's a game so you can let that, slide. Well, I can anyway. Well and truly given up on the collectibles by this point though. Only real complaint for this specific level is the length. It's very easy to waste the checkpoints too early and find yourself retreading old ground. Clam Bay. My favourite level of this world. Whilst not entirely clear what to do at first, simply needing to collect 3 keys spread around the small sandbox is a surprisingly open approach to this level. It felt like I was sequence breaking by jumping up a pipe at the start of the level, and that was pretty cool too. Combat did dampen it a little, and I did softlock myself once due to killing enemies I needed to use as weights for a puzzle, but in concept and execution, not bad. Might even be the best level up to this point. Sewer Factory. Poisoned water, poison gas, lots of swimming, horrible green filter over everything. I found myself trying to rush through this one. Swimming through dark green sludgy filth is incredibly difficult to see through, and the game isn't fun if you can't see what you're doing. It's just, bad? Poison mechanic is simply tedious, especially when combined with bland swimming and tedious combat. Portmanteau. Great level name. Like the town setup, and the need to work your way for an Indiana Jones style temple, up to the town, further up to find some more keys, and then back down to a sinking pirate ship for the end. It's quite a large level, I do admit, but I did remember this one without having to look at any footage, so it definitely stood out, so kudos there I suppose. Leaping Falls. This one was a slog, but I didn't hate it. Okay, I struggled here, I died a lot, but it also follows a pretty solid 3-part structure throughout. Enter the 3 ships to unlock the path up the cliff, then complete the time trial ring challenges that appear from time to time in order to clear another path forward towards the finish. The size of the level is what kept me struggling here. The ring race must be done in one go, and if you get stuck like I did, it's like banging your head against a wall. It was tough and I barely made it, but compared to a level which forces non-stop combat at you, I'd take this any day. The boss, Cap'n Damp. So yep, we're at the end of World 2 now, and now we fight the boss. Same problems as with Boss 1 really. Mechanically the boss is easy to work out, but never really crosses the threshold of being fun. The most it summoned from me was a disinterested... The snake wheel, an ability that allows you to transform into a snake and rocket around the world at a speed, is a nice idea, and it can come handy in the obnoxiously large levels. But it is awkward to control, as you control it with the camera stick instead of your normal movement left stick. It never feels intuitive, and the chase segments in this boss fight are not fun. Again, simply tutorialising a new item feels unnatural for a boss fight, even though the main phases are a little bit more combat heavy than the previous one. better than the World 1 boss, but not by much, marginally. So yeah, to sum this up, whilst I didn't dislike this world, I find myself leaning closer towards the feeling of apathy above anything else. Mechanics like the swing shot, snake wheel and poison swamps actively irritated me, whilst the normal platforming remains relatively strong. Leaping Falls makes excellent use of the mechanics, and possibly being the first level that felt intentionally designed to challenge your platforming chops. But the majority of the levels are no more than okay. Thinking back, no level was worse than Pig Experiments, nothing close. So whilst I was having less fun than in World 1, the levels were probably slightly better. I didn't spend any time at this point going through the Flipside levels in World 2 and decided instead just to head on to New Neo City, the third world. Before I move on to that, it's time for another diversion. Characters. I'll be brief, as though this game has plenty of character. The story isn't the heaviest, so the characters don't get the focus for more than a brief moment here and there. The protagonist, Beebs, is a charming protagonist who is probably more character driven than I had originally expected. The way in which you can, on occasion, see genuine sadness or want in her words when she isn't taken seriously in her pursuit of the throne of the Demon King. Her friend Lucy means a lot to her, and when she refuses to support Beebs in her mission, I did legitimately feel her sadness. Her friend abandoning her to protect the Demon King she barely knows. I mean, it's not the most believable story, but it fits the game. With Beebs and Lucy, you get the most character focus, with the Kappa-inspired sidekick Midgie being no more than a sidekick, a character just made to explain things to Beebs world to world. He is upbeat and supports Beebs all the way, but is pretty one-dimensional. Other minor characters fill out a world and give them, character, but aren't memorable in their own right. The pig miners of the first world to the bird inhabitants of the third. Each character has their own little unique flavour to bring to the table, but instead just act as a small supplement to the world rather than feeling as if they're believable characters in their own right. On the whole, the characters and the story of this game are very much an afterthought, but albeit a very well constructed one. I was going to speak about the Demon King here, but something that's going to come up in the World 3 section did prevent me from doing that due to my lack of exposure to him. I can't say I remember the characters in this game very fondly in 1 year's time, but for now, they are passable. World 3, New Neo City. That's a great name for a world, isn't it? It seems to be inspired by a cyberpunk / Blade Runner-esque Tokyo, and is the most aesthetically appealing world so far, in my eyes at least. Baby City. Worst baby level so far. The level took 14 minutes 26 seconds, much longer than the other introductory levels to each world. It isn't particularly hard, but when reaching the first combat arena, the game becomes borderline unfair. The enemy placement deliberately puts the enemies out of reach and force you to either attempt a very difficult jump, which thrice ended in my death, or to wait and hope they don't just drop onto you and kill you in an instant. The platforming afterwards is no more than fine, but the broth was well and truly spoilt earlier on. There is a new mechanic which involves jumping onto sticky walls, and it's quite fun to play around with, but I don't know, the start of the level really ruined my fun throughout it. It's not a complete write-off, but again, not great. Scare Tower. Great idea. Execution sucks balls. A big spooky tower in which you need to navigate to the very top. The jumping through a block to materialise platforms to stand on is a nice gimmick. It doesn't make sense when you read it, but look on screen, that'll make more sense. But when the jumps involve jumping off screen into the void and hoping for the best, it really doesn't feel fun. It took a lot of time to get through this one, 20 minutes actually. 20 minutes for one level. Jumping through instant kill areas with no warning is not fun. Double jumping cancelling out gadgets isn't fun. Curse zones, which are introduced here and involve challenges where the Demon King deprives you of an ability such as spinning or jumping, can be fun, but they don't fix the overarching problem in that the levels are getting far too long to ever be truly enjoyable. It's a bad level. I also wrote in my notes here that I wanted to quit, so again, yeah, not a good sign. Herb Tops. A city that involves you pulling poorly signposted switches to unlock other parts of the townscape, lowering walls, erecting staircases and rushing through a deadly obstacle course. The problem is the curse zones are quickly becoming infuriating due to what I'm going to describe as troll mechanics. You're encouraged to jump off screen and need to be hit by the equivalent of a whomp. In a curse section you're unable to jump, but you use the swing shot instead. Unfortunately, the swing shot doesn't take you far enough and you fall down a gap. The combat sections are still torture. I also wrote that I wanted to quit here, which, yeah, the pattern seems to be forming. Highest Way. Hooray! A level I didn't hate. The level uses the sneak wheel gadget, and by adding speed to the mix, the game does manage to take a slightly pleasant upturn here. The camera does impede progress on occasion, but it gets away with it because the platforming is fun, in spite of the game. There is an area where you can be soft-locked if you fall, but still the best World 3 has given me so far. Top Roofs. This level is inoffensive, but does bring up a minor gripe I've had for a while. When you die, why do you keep collectibles like the cakes and the lollipops, but not the keys you need to unlock the path forward? Collection zones that appear in the worlds where you have to collect a set number of keys to unlock the path forward are tedious. That seems to be a word I'm defaulting to for a lot of the game that isn't just the platform mechanics. This particular area utilises swimming to collect the keys, but again it's unmemorable. The level is mostly inoffensive, but after just watching my footage back, I can't remember anything about it. And here, after this level, I took a break. I took 3 days off from this game at this point, not due to outside pressures, but just the utter mediocrity of Demon Turf finally taking its toll on me. This was not the end of the world, but I simply couldn't stomach any more of this game. I often bore my friends with my theories about video games, and I claim that there is something worth seeing in every video game. That no matter the dumpster fires the game can be, there is something worth seeing, good or bad. I do often exclude games like this from the conversation because, unfortunately, there really isn't much to enjoy, and only very, very little to hate either. The game is crafted with love and care, and it is a functioning product. For fans of 3D platformers, I'm sure a game like this scratches an itch they had for an indie Mario, but for me, this might just be the most mediocre game I've ever played. So I considered stopping. I considered it long and hard and decided to pick the game up one more time. One more attempt at seeing this through and finding the mental fortitude to finish this product. I don't finish every game I play, but at this point I was 6,000 words into a script and had quite a few sunk costs. I'm making this video regardless, but I must admit to feeling apprehensive about posting my very first video essay about a game I didn't finish. So this is what I did. I finished the third area and the boss. Let's rush through them now. Subway Surfing. This level was very good. I'm happy I took a break, but these little levels are what the game does best. Short, platforming heavy levels that are well signposted and a good challenge to boot. Not much else to say, but I have a bit more faith regarding continuing on with this game now. Union Builds. Utilisation of large spinning cranes to work beams for a building site. There's some interesting platforming here, and it's a really, really good use of your base mechanics, and I like this a lot as well. It's 2 really, really strong levels to end this world. And now the boss. Okay, the new ability here is quite nice. It's a ability that turns you into a bird and you can glide across vast distances at a decent speed, and that's fun to do. Sure, in the battle itself, the camera locks and it's very, very simple to just glide into the abyss, but mechanically, and in terms of the entertainment the boss gives you, this was probably my favourite boss fight, and my preferred gadget. It wasn't terrible, it was an average boss. And now we get to the flip side, and this, I'm afraid, is where it ends. I spent an hour total trying to get to the end of one of these obtuse, dull stages, and I just couldn't do it. I'm not saying that these levels are simply too difficult or that they are bad. I'm just saying that the way the difficulty is done in this game gives me personally absolutely no joy. I tried the Union Builds flip side, the Subway Surfing flip side, and the Top Roofs flip side. I liked the normal levels for 2 of these, and I just couldn't get to the end of any of them. I even went back and tried the flip levels I skipped in World 2, and I just didn't have fun with them. The ideas presented in these flipside levels make the original short, sharp platforming challenges into longer, deviously difficult trials from hell. The darker environments make things more difficult to pick out, and everything in the level seems designed just to make the player's life hell. And that just isn't for me. So, yep, I am done. I have finished 3 worlds, put in over 10 hours, and I just can't justify playing the game any longer. As a game, this is designed to be more punishing than Mario due to the one-hit kill mechanic, being used not for the protagonist, but for the enemies instead. No, that's the opposite way round, that's the way it is in Mario. Mario, you get multiple hits. In Demon Turf, if you get hit once, you die. Enemies don't really die unless you knock them into something. This makes the game far more punishing than a normal platforming fare, and if you like challenging 3D platformers, this is almost certainly a game worth playing. But the challenge here just isn't for me. I don't believe quitting a game you are not enjoying is inherently a bad thing. If you've tried to enjoy the game on its terms, taking it for what it is and not what you wish it would be, and still get no joy from that experience, then there's no harm in stopping. Gaming is a hobby. Hobbies are supposed to bring the hobbyist joy, and if they don't, why force yourself? So, as I'm not continuing on with the game, let's wrap this up and speak of the few areas I haven't spoken on yet. Mini games and extras, such as the shop. I'm going to cut to the chase. The mini games aren't fun. I hate to say it, but the additional content in this game all stinks of fluff to me. I'm not against a game with a large wealth of various interesting activities for the player to indulge in, as it is what I love most about the Yakuza and the Judgment games, but the difference is the side content in those games is enjoyable. I'll briefly address my problems with each, and then we can finally move towards the conclusion of this giant waste of time. Okay? Good. Fighting arena. The fighting in the game is my least favourite part, so a whole optional mode where you just fight mobs over and over again is my idea of hell. Tedious, unenjoyable drivel. Next. Demon Soccer Golf. And yes, they really did call it that. I have no problem with the concept here. Navigating a soccer ball along a linear course into a goal is a fine if slightly unoriginal idea. However, the ball is controlled by your combat thrusts, so the game is often just a fight with fiddly mechanics instead of a mildly entertaining romp. A shame, but next. Mr. Mint's platforming? Mr. Mint's platforming challenges. These are good. I only did a couple as it was very much done with the game when I got to this point, but short, sharp bursts of difficult platforming are exactly what this game does best. Whilst the rewards for finishing these challenges are just incredibly paltry, the enjoyable platforming is a reward in itself, so these get a pass. Good. Next. Photographs. Photographic challenges. An excuse to use the game's photo mode and nothing more. Fun to tinker with, but dull after 5 minutes. Arcade. I can't comment on these because after 10 hours I had not unlocked even one single arcade cabinet. It's a shame, but yeah, I can't comment on anything here. Next, there are some mods you can buy from some shops and some other extra things to buy, such as pets and dyes, but it is all just superficial. It's not completely superfluous, but it's just not something I get just any pleasure from. And that's it. I do think we're finally at the end. Demon Turf is a tale of squandered potential. I like the art direction, the music, and the charming world that the team at Fabraz have created. Beebs and her little entourage offer little, but still bring more emotional resonance than most other 3D platformers provide. Occasionally offering up small servings of emotion makes the game stand out amongst games of this kind. The moveset is diverse, and Beebs controls extremely well. Demon Turf does do an awful lot right, but After 10 hours with the game, I'd only collected 28 of the 50 batteries needed to unlock that final boss fight. And Demon Turf was a game that I enjoyed less the more I played of it. The level design, if simply challenging, could be forgiven, but the complete inconvenience of the checkpoint yourself system and the trial and error nature of many sections turn the majority of levels into excessively long, boring, tedious slogs through increasingly disappointing environments. The combat is tedious at best and downright infuriating at worst, and the boss fights boil down to being little more than tutorials for the next fiddly gadget instead of a challenge on what the player has learnt in each world. What good are mechanics, music and art if the levels themselves rarely elicit any kind of joy from me? I wanted to like Demon Turf, and I desperately tried to do so, but I'm afraid to say that I just don't. There is a game to enjoy here, and some people most likely will, but this game could have been so much more. And it is one that with a heavy heart I will never likely revisit again. Demon Turf is the very definition of a 5 out of 10 game, and that's okay, but I am glad I didn't force myself to finish it. Thank you for watching, and good night.